Shalom Aleichem, Bruchim Hanimsoim. Today is Yud Beis Adar Aleph, Tavshin Pei Daled, 2024. Today I'd like to talk about Emunas Chachamim, recognizing and accepting the authority of Talmidei Chachamim. One of the most beautiful definitions, I think, and foundations of Emunas Chachamim I've ever seen is in the writings of Rav Dessler in Michtav Miliyahu. He explains as follows, bringing a passage from the Mesilas Yesharim by Rav Moshe Chaim Lutzato in Perek Gimel. He talks about something called a Gan HaMevucheh, which in English is translated as a maze, M-A-Z-E. You know how a maze works. There's a garden with a large space, a very large space, and you build certain pathways of trees, of different saplings and trees and bushes, which are made, and paths go down different alleyways and different areas, but some of them lead to nowhere, and you can come to a dead end. And it's very difficult if you're inside the maze, you think you found the way, and you're going down the wrong way, you're going down the wrong path. You think you're on the wrong way, but you're not. And you can spend perhaps sometimes hours in it. I remember when I was a child, I think I was about 10 years old, we went to one of the castles in England. I'm not sure if it was Blenheim Palace, I think where Winston Churchill was born, or maybe one of the Queen's castles, Windsor Castle, I can't remember. But there was a very large maze, and I was running around inside the maze, and I lost my way, and it took quite some time to find the way out. Says Rav Dessler, quoting from the Mesilas Yesharim, if you're fortunate, there is something called a tower, an andauta, which is like a platform in the middle of the maze, and you can go be guided by the person in the top of the tower, and he tells you, turn right, turn left, and you'll find your way out. If there's somebody up there, if there's nobody up there, then of course you're in trouble. You have to find your way out, and you're groping along. If you're clever and if you're wise, you'll listen to the man on top who'll tell you, turn right, turn left, and you'll find your way out of the maze. If you're independent-minded and you're very strong-minded, you refuse to listen to him, maybe you'll go your own way, but who's to say you'll get out of the maze? And that's where the problems come in. When you don't listen to the man in the tower, and he's really directing you for your own benefit. Of course, the parable speaks for itself, such a beautiful mashal. There are many challenges which a person goes through in life, and different situations which maybe you think you're in a maze. You can't find your way out. You can't find your way through the trees, through the different problems, through the distractions which you're in. And it's a major challenge, trying to find your way in and out of this difficulty that you're in. If you're fortunate and you can ask a Talmid Chacham, you can ask a person who's very wise, who knows the ways of the Torah, who's very often been through many of the challenges which you have been through and overcome them, he can direct you. He can see from above. One of the most beautiful definitions of a Talmid Chacham is an Einei Ha'eda, the eyes of the community. The example is given, for example, of a city under siege, and the watch on the tower sees above and beyond the walls of the city, and he has eyes further than most people. Chacham haroeh es hanoilad. He sees ahead. He sees further ahead. And many Talmid Chacham have what's called this sort of chokhmah and understanding, to be able to see further. If you're fortunate in the situation, and you can go and ask a Talmid Chacham what to do in the situation, then you can find your way out of the maze. And is the most beautiful mashal, the parable of Moshe Chaim Lutzato, which is brought down, if you want to look it up, it's in Michtav Miliyahu, Chelik Aleph, the first volume, page 59. And Rav Dessler brings out, he thinks that is really the foundation of all concepts, of all understanding and the mindset, when it comes to something called Emunas Chachamim, having faith and recognition and accepting the authority and the wisdom of a Talmid Chacham. I'd like to share with you certain scenarios which I had myself. I found myself inside the maze under certain circumstances, and I didn't know what to do under these circumstances. Let me explain to you what I did, and I want to show you how I was fortunate to ask the man in the handout, the Talmid Chacham, and he helped me out in the different ways that I needed. Let me explain to you some of the examples. It came to the time that I was marrying off my daughter, my oldest daughter, and I'd never married off a child before, and I didn't know what to look for. I didn't know what to search for. I wanted to do the best for my daughter, but I didn't know. What do you look for when you're looking for a chosen for your daughter? And I went and asked one of the great Talmidei Chachamim in Beit Vegan here in Jerusalem, Rabbi Naftali Kaplan, Shlita, the Gaon, the great Talmid Chacham, and I asked him, what do you look for when you're looking for a chosen for your daughter? And he told me as follows. He had the same question, and he asked Rav Shach. And Rav Shach Zecher Tzaddik Levracha answered in the following way. He said, what you look for in a chosen are three things. The first thing is a masmid, someone who's persevering, who's diligent with his learning. He said he didn't have to be a shooting star. He didn't have to be the best bacher, the best genius, or an ilui in yeshiva. But he had to be somebody who was serious about his learning Torah. That learning Torah was important to him. The definition of a masmid, said Naftali to me, is somebody who's careful and who's deliberate and he's persevering in his learning. The second, he told me, is look for somebody who is a Chachamim, someone who's careful in halacha, meaning someone who is particular. He's careful about davening on time, he's careful about kashrus, he's careful about tznius of modesty, meaning Chachamim means the level of fear of the Almighty that he has, how careful he is about different aspects of halacha, of Jewish law. And finally is somebody called a Baal Midas Tovos, he told me, and it helped me tremendously. A Baal Midas Tovos, someone who's kind, who's thoughtful, who's empathetic, who recognizes the needs of somebody else. I found that definition wonderfully operational. I could work with it tremendously. I found it very, very helpful. And I started looking for my daughter, and I went ahead on that way. I then went to another Talmid Chacham who was in the Andarta, meaning Moron Harav Eliashiv, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. I asked him, what do you do in order to find a chosen for your daughter? And he said to me as follows. The first thing is you must go to a good shadchan who knows his business. They know their job well. And secondly, he said to me, you must also pray and daven to the Almighty that you will be able to find a suitable chosen for your daughter. And I took that point, and he mentioned to me like Rabbi Eliezer, the servant of Avraham, who stood there and davened at the well, you remember, looking for a shidduch for Yitzchak, and Rivka turned up at the well. And I found those definitions very, very useful. I was in a maze. I didn't know what to do. And I found the chokhmah of these Talmid Chacham tremendously useful and very, very inspiring. It helped me a tremendous amount in order to find my way through. I must tell you an episode that happened further to me, which I was in the maze as well. I daven in the morning in the Mir Yeshiva. And I was looking around in the davening one morning, and behind me there was a certain bocher who I spoke to after davening. I thought he would be very suitable for my daughter. And I started talking to him and discussing with him. And I thought maybe he would be suitable. I discussed certain things with him. And I went down to the office and I asked them what his name was, who this person, the bocher, I got his name. And they told me he came from Haifa. His father was a professor in the Technion University. And from what I could understand, it was a home where they did not keep Torah and mitzvahs. He was himself a chazek, someone who strengthened himself from a home which was not necessarily a home where they kept Shabbos or they kept all the halachas. I thought to myself, shall I go ahead with this as well? That was another maze which I found myself in. Shall I go ahead or not? And I went and asked another great man inside an Andauta, inside the platform, another Talmid Chacham. I asked the great Gaon, Rabbi Aryeh Finkel, the Rosh Yeshiva of the Mir, what do you do under these circumstances? Is it useful to go ahead? Should I let my daughter go into a family where perhaps they don't keep Shabbos, or they don't learn Torah, or they don't have kashrus? Is it useful for me to do such a thing like that? She said, right. Is it fair for my daughter? And Rabbi Aryeh turned around to me and said as follows. I can still remember his face, and he smiled at me. He said to me as follows: the great Steipler Rov, the father of Reb Chaim Kanievsky, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, took one. He said, when Nissim Karelitz, the great posek in Bnei Brak, also took one, and he smiled at me and said, I also took one, and I had no regrets at all. And I learned from that, one shouldn't look too much at yichus, at background. Of course, it's very subjective. If you only want that sort, I'm not saying it's wrong, of course not. I'm saying as a suggestion, to take somebody who's necessarily mischazek, and Rabbi Aryeh told me, none of us had any regrets at all. Don't look too much at the background of the families. I remember after that, I saw, in a response from the Steipler himself, in our generation, you can find many, many children who come from wonderful families, but they're not necessarily the best of children. And you can find also certain children who are literally tzaddikim, who don't come from homes. That's the nature of the world that we're living in nowadays. It's a cholent. You have all sorts in all sorts of families. And I learned from that. That was the maze, and it helped me tremendously. I found eventually, I think, someone who was perfect, but it helped me wonderfully in this direction. I went and asked a Talmid Chacham. I had Emunas Chachamim, and I was very pleased that I did such a thing. Let me tell you another situation, a personal, because I think this year will be very much made up of case studies, which will help you to understand the concept of Talmidei Chachamim and Emunas Chachamim as well. Let me tell you another situation I was in, which helped me tremendously. A bocher came up to me in the Mir Yeshiva, and he wanted to stay and learn in the yeshiva. I'm not a mashgiach there, I'm not a Talmid Chacham there, but I learned in the Mir, and I had a connection with this particular bocher. And he said to me that every time he spoke to his parents, his father, to come to carry on learning, his father screamed and shouted at him, and it was a terrible, terrible, awful, explosive situation. His father wanted him to come back to New York to be a lawyer, and he wanted to stay and learn in the Mir Yeshiva. And it became unbelievably contentious. He told me that every time he spoke to his father, his parents, his father screamed at him, and it got so bad, he said, said, his father turned around and said, and if you don't come back, I'm going to cut you out of my will. Evidently his father was very wealthy. And he didn't know what to do. I said to him as follows, why don't we go and ask the Posek Hador? Why don't we go and ask Rabbi Alpren? Go and ask a Talmid Chacham, what do you do under these circumstances? How are we supposed to react? How can you possibly react to your father? What is the best way so you don't get upset or angry with your father, but nevertheless you can solve the situation? We went together to ask Rabbi Alpren, and he answered as follows. It was a beautiful answer. He said as follows, before you ever pick up the phone and talk to your father, you should stand in a room quietly and say a few chapters of Tehillim, of Psalms. Say over the Psalms, and when you've finished, say as follows. Say, ask the Almighty that you want to keep the mitzvah of kibbud avoim. You do not want to get angry, you do not want to shout, you don't want to have an argument or a difficult situation with your father. You want it to work. I want to keep the mitzvah. I need siyata d'shmaya, said Rabbi Alpren. Say to Hashem, I need siyata d'shmaya in order to keep the mitzvah of kibbud avoim. Try that and see if it works. Believe it or not, it worked wonders. I remember, I think he's still learning there in the Mir at the moment. He had a beautiful family. His father eventually agreed. When you bring the Almighty into the scene, which is really the greatest wisdom, I suppose, of Talmid Chachamim, when you bring the Almighty into the scene and you pray and you ask Hashem to help you, it's not just a situation, a family relationship of a father and a son. It becomes a three-way party as well. The Almighty is inside the situation. You ask the Almighty for help. You ask Hashem to help you by davening. I found that a wonderful answer. The answer, we got out of the maze, we got out of the situation like that. And I thought it was a wonderful explanation which we had there, and it helped us tremendously. Let me tell you another situation, another case study which I had also. I was inside the maze and I didn't know what to do. My wife and I had a tremendous problem. We didn't know what to do with the situation as follows. We were blessed with a family of many boys in our family, and all of them together. And as you know, boys together fight. And it became an awful atmosphere in the home. The boys were fighting with each other, and they all had full of energy and full of life and full of determination. It became very, very awkward in the home. Many fights and many tears, and it became awful inside the home, the atmosphere. Children were fighting each other, as boys do, and I didn't know what to do. I was sitting at a wedding talking to a friend, and he also has many children, many sons in his family. And I turned around and said, this is my problem. He said, I had the same problem as well with my children. I went and asked the stipler, what shall I do? The father of Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, what do I do under these situations? And he turned around and said to me, and the stipler beamed with a big smile and said to me as follows. What you have is called a gesunte Machele, a very healthy illness. Meaning, children are wild, children have koiches, children have energy inside, and they have to let it out. It's a Machele, but it's a gesunte Machele, meaning the children have life inside them. I found that wonderfully refreshing and very helpful. I was in a maze, and after I heard that, I don't think I laughed when the children fought, but I was more relaxed. It helped me a great deal, how to handle the situation, what to do in a situation when children are fighting with each other. It helped me tremendously, that sort of approach. I must tell you further. When I was first in Eretz Yisrael, I lived in a place called Rehov Sorotsky, next door to the Yeshiva Torah, next door to Rav Steinberg's Yeshiva. I remember I was once on the street talking to someone who was a great Talmid Chacham, who is the Rosh Yeshiva in Azata, Reb Moshe Shirkin, a Talmid of Rav Putnam. And I was talking to him about Chinuch Bonim, and I told him about the children fighting and etc., the problem. And he turned around to me and he said as follows. He said, let me tell you what happened to me. I was in Netivot one day, and my children were with me, and they had a full-scale punch-up on the street, on the sidewalk, and it was awful. They were punching and screaming each other, and it was a terrible fight on the street. I felt absolutely awful. I went on the other side of the street. I wanted to disown them. As I went on the other side of the street, the Rosh Yeshiva of Azata, Rabbi Socha Meir Zecher Tzadik, walked down the street, and he saw me on the other side of the street. He turned around to me and said, are those your children? Are those? And I cowered under and I embarrassed. And I said, yes, they are, Rabbi. Rosh Yeshiva, they are. And I felt so embarrassed. And the Rosh Yeshiva gave me a big beam, and he turned around to me, big smile, and he said as follows, don't worry. At least if they're fighting, let them fight. They won't become bank tellers. They won't become bank, meaning they'll fight in the Milchamto Shel Torah. And I found that wonderfully refreshing. Children fight. Children have a lot of energy. Boys especially have a great deal of it, and they need to let it out. And he said to me, don't be too concerned about it. And that together with his Gesunte Machele helped me a tremendous amount. I then went to another Talmid Chacham to discuss it. And what do I do? This was where the great Mordechai Zuckerman, the Talmid Zecher Tzadik Yivrocha, the Talmid of the Chofetz Chaim, who I used to daven in his minyan to give out shul. I discussed the problem with him also. What do you do? How do you mechanech children? How do you educate children? And he turned around and said to me, and he said as follows. He said, Yonason, what you need is 3 things. Dugma, dugma, and dugma. Meaning 3 times over a role model. Be a role model for your children. And that's the point which he brought out. I found that very refreshing. What you have to do as a parent, and that was from the man in the tower. I was in a maze. I didn't know what to do. And he helped tremendously. And these are the different points which I picked up. And I found them very refreshing and very helpful. I found my way out of the maze through asking a Talmid Chacham. And that was called Emunas Chachamim. And I hope it will help you as well. But let me tell you about another situation which I'm still in the maze, and unfortunately I can't find my way out at all. I'm stuck inside the maze and it's very cloudy, it's very foggy, and I can't see my way through. Let me discuss with you the challenge which I'm going through now, which I'm sure you are as well. It happened several months ago on a Shabbos morning. Shabbos is Yom Menucha. Vayivorech Elokim es Yom HaShvi vayikadesh, I say. Shabbos Kodesh is a tremendous day of Kedusha and Menucha in Klal Yisrael. The day happened to also fall together with Simchas Torah. At the end of the most beautiful Chag, when we went down to different places and singing and dancing, and it was on the Shabbos morning of Simchas Torah. And I was davening in shul about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, and we were all singing, and the singing was beautiful with tremendous gusto and tremendous enthusiasm. Later on I realized, as all this was happening, a few miles down the road from where I lived, there was the most horrific scene, a butcher he was going on, the most horrific scene of devastation which was going on in Gaza. I thought to myself, what an incredible situation this is. As we were dancing on Simchas Torah, on the most happiest days in the Jewish calendar, on Shabbos Kodesh as well, how can such a thing possibly happen? How can it happen? And over 1,000, I think 1,500 people were killed. And ever since then, we've had an awful situation of hostages. I'm in a maze, Rabbi Isai. What do you do about the hostages? What do you do about the number of cholim? What do you do about all the avedim and the Emunas, the widows in Klal Yisrael, and the orphans which will come out, and the soldiers who are standing on the front, and those people who are sent out of their homes? I'm in a maze now, and I don't see my way out. I can't see my way out. I must be honest with you. To be honest, I think I have an answer to this maze. I think I can get out of it myself. But I'm scared to say so, simply because I'm not a Talmid Chacham, and I haven't heard any great Adam Godel in Torah explain it this way. But I feel myself, I do know the answer to the situation. It happened early in the morning, something like Sdom and Amorah. No, it also happened early in the morning, the destruction of Sdom and Amorah. And also you see that those people who were saved were those people who screamed out and cried out, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and also those who were Makabel on themselves Shabbos and accepted the authority of the Almighty. I do have an answer, but to be honest, I'm scared of putting it on record here. But if you think about the situation of what was happening there and what was going on, and those people who were saved, and it happened early in the morning, something like Sdom and Amorah. I will not publicize it. If you want to be in touch with me privately, please do. But I feel I can't publicize it. But if you think a little bit further, you do get to some sort of response. You can find your way out of the maze. But until a Talmid Chacham comes and tells me that I'm right, I would prefer to keep it quiet. But think about the scene. How can it be that such a situation, on such a day of Shabbos Kodesh, such Menucha, and a Simchas Torah, a day of full joy, and we're all singing and dancing at the same time? There was an enormous, horrific scene. Even nothing has happened like that since the time of the Shoah, since the time of the Holocaust, 80 years ago. Nothing has happened on one day, on such a holy day, on such a special day of great Simcha. How can it happen? Think about it yourself, and think about Sdom and Amorah, and think about these scenes as well, and those people who were saved. Again, if you want to be in touch with me, I could share it privately, but I feel I'm embarrassed and I'm scared to say it myself in public like this on a share. But it's a maze. It's a difficult situation. What do you do in these situations? If you want to, you can reject the opinion of all Talmidei Chachamim. You remember the famous song which Frank Sinatra said, I did it my way. You can do it my way, but who's to say my way is the right way? That's the whole problem. If you're in a maze and you refuse to listen to the man in the Andarta in the tower, how do you know how long it will take you until you get out of the maze? How do you know if you'll ever get out of the maze? How do you know you'll ever find your path out? If you do it on your own, who's to say that your way is the right way? And if you take advice from a Talmid Chacham and someone who guides you, then you can find you. I found that with Shidduchim, I found out with a law student, with a Teshiva Bacha, and I also found out with Chinuch Bonim. I wish one of the Talmidei Chachamim would come forward and show me my way out of this maze which I'm in. Of course, I realize my duty at the moment, my obligation is to daven as a bystander and to, as much as I can, to help these people, the orphans and the soldiers and the situation that we're in and the hostages, as best as we can. That's why we spend each tefillah davening and on our minds and our thoughts are continuing on these people. We're in a maze here in this situation. We need the advice of a great Talmid Chacham to show us how we can move on. Of course, unfortunately, I don't want to make this shir into a political scene. If only these people who are running the country, who are running the organization, who are running everything, if only they would turn around to our Talmid Chacham maybe and ask, what do we do under this situation? What do we do when there's so many hostages? What do we do with the soldiers who are on the front, who are in danger? What do we do? But they don't ask the question. They don't turn to see the man in the andouta in the platform, and look maybe for Talmid Chacham, and look for the wisdom and the understanding and the tremendous siyata d'shmaya which a Talmid Chacham has. And that's therefore the great need which unfortunately is not there at the moment. I wish it was, and I pray that they would turn and ask a Talmid Chacham, what do we do under these circumstances, under these situations? It's a very desperate situation indeed. Just let me share with you, I remember one particular time, I remember hearing in Israeli politics, if you remember, I think at the time of Entebbe it was, or the terrorists who captured me, I don't know if it was Entebbe, when they took Rav Hutner into Dawson's Field in Jordan, and it was a terribly difficult problem. And Yitzhak Rabin was the prime minister. I remember hearing about it, and he didn't know what to do, whether they should send people in to try and save them or not. And what happened in the end, Yitzhak Rabin went to the Rav of Yerushalayim, Rabbi Zolti. Rabbi Zolti said to him, there's only one person who can solve this problem. And they went together at midnight and woke up Rabbi Eliashiv. What do we do? Can we go and save them? How can we go in and save them? And Rabbi Eliashiv opened up to Gemara Sanhedrin and looked up the Gemara about Pidyon and Shuvah, and then turned them and said to them, you can do it, but this way and that way. And he gave direction. And Baruch Hashem, they were successful. I think the only person who was killed, Lo Aleinu, was the brother of Binyamin Netanyahu. But you see that you have to ask advice. Ask from the Talmid Chachamim. They are the people in the top of the tower. They are the people who have the wisdom and the Chachma from the Almighty. The Ran mentions in his drashas a most beautiful point. In the time when there were prophets in Klal Yisrael, then the direct link was made to the Almighty, the Kisei HaKavod. When there aren't Nabiim, there aren't prophets, you have Talmid Chachamim. And that's the need to go and ask advice from Emunas Chachamim, from great Talmidim Chachamim in the time. If that's the case, what I'd like to do is suggest to you the theory which you need to know behind Emunas Chachamim, which I hope will help you understand the concepts of why Emunas Chachamim is so important. I'd like to start with a posuk in Shir Hashirim, Perek Aleph, posuk Tesvav. Shlomo HaMelech says as follows. This is the theory which you need to know, the torah behind Emunas Chachamim, which I hope will help you in guidance and instruction and enlighten you what it means to have Emunas Chachamim. Shlomo HaMelech says in Shir Hashirim, Hinuch Yofa Rayosi, Hinuch Yofa Einayich Yoinim. Behold, you are beautiful, my beloved. Rayosi is like the Re'em Ahuvim, my beloved. Hinuch Yofa, you are beauty. Einayich Yoinim, you have the eyes of a dove. The Vilna Gaon explains that sentence as follows. Hinuch Yofa Rayosi, behold you are beautiful, my beloved, refers to the Re'em Ahuvim, to the beloved ancestors, Avraham, Yitzhak, and our great ancestry of Schus Avos. They themselves, our ancestry and our merit of our fathers, the generations who go before, they themselves were beautiful. That's previous generations. Hinuch Yofa, but you yourself, individuals themselves, they have what's called Einayich Yoinim, the eyes of a dove. If you remember, Klal Yisrael are very often referred to a dove. Yonosi b'chek b'hasel. Klal Yisrael are very often compared to a dove. A dove is always very devoted, one to the mate, meaning Klal Yisrael to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we're very devoted. Yonosi, often Klal Yisrael are called my dove. Why the eyes of the dove? Says the Vilna Gaon as follows. There is one very unique feature about the eyes of a dove, and that is the two eyes are perfectly matched. They are completely symmetrical, not one is greater than the other. They're identical in size and identical in position. One stands right next to the other. Says the Vilna Gaon, they refer to as follows. One eye represents Chochmah and one eye represents Yira. Meaning the beauty of Klal Yisrael is, the beauty of a Talmid Chacham is that he has one eye which is perfect in formation for Chochmah, and one eye which is perfect in formation for Yira. Says the Vilna Gaon, what happens if you have a Talmid Chacham who has more Chochmah than he has Yira? He's very clever, he's ingenious, he's a wizard in Torah, but he's diminished when it comes to Yiras Shamayim. He said that's called Bezuya. That's a little bit more disgusting. He doesn't have Yiras Shamayim. His Yiras Shamayim doesn't match his Chochmah. It's a Chaval. What happens if you have a person who has more Yiras Shamayim Shamayim than Chachma, that's called dalus, that's called weak, because he doesn't have the Chachma to match it. The two must go together. When the two are matched together, when you have a Talmud Chacham who has Chachma and Yirah together, Reishis Chachma Yiras Hashem, there you have it. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Almighty, and that's the definition. If you have the two together, then you have the perfect combination. And that is the nature, I think, what you're looking for in the Talmud Chacham. Meaning, the background is the Chachma and the Yirah, the fear of the Almighty and the wisdom, the knowledge of Torah together. If that's the case, we can now move on to a different reference in Mishlei, in Perek Yud Tes, Pasuk Kof and Pasuk Kof Aleph. In this pasuk, Shlomo HaMelech describes as follows: what does it mean to take advice? And it's a beautiful pasuk, and it really gives tremendous guidance inside the maze. Shema Eitza, v'kabel Musa, lema'an techkam be'acharisecha. Shema, listen. Listen also means to accept. Accept the Chochmah. Shema Eitza. Eitza refers to the Chochmah. Listen carefully and accept the Chochmah. Listen to what's being told. Bekabel Musa, and accept the authority, meaning accept the Yirah Shamayim, says the Malbim. The Eitza refers to the Chochmah, and the Musa refers to Yirah Shamayim. Meaning, when you go to a Talmud Chacham, listen carefully and hear and understand and accept the Chochmah that he's bringing out to you. Bekabel Musa, and accept also the authority of the Yirah Shamayim, which he has. In order that, Laman Techkam, you'll become very wise afterwards, if you can do such a thing. Meaning, if you're careful to listen to a Talmud Chacham in such a respect, someone who has Chachma and Yirah together, then you'll be wise in the end. Laman Techkam. The next pasuk says a beautiful pasuk, which we say every morning. Rabbi's machshavas belevish, v'atzas Hashem hisokum. There are many, many thoughts in the minds of man. Meaning, a person has many ideas, and many dreams, and many fantasies. V'atzas Hashem. But at the end of the day, what wins out is the advice of the Almighty. Where do you find out the advice of the Almighty? By the first pasuk, Shema Eitza v'kabel Musa. If you can listen to Talmud Chacham and listen to the wisdom that he's telling you, from there you can grow, and there you can understand exactly what you have to do. That is the situation. I'm suggesting, Rabbi say, these two references really are the source and the background and the enlightenment which we have when it comes to Emunas Chachamim. The first is that recognize what is the beauty of a Talmud Chacham. The beauty is the eyes of a dove, meaning the Chachma and the Yirah go together. The wisdom and the fear of the Almighty are perfectly matched. Not one is greater than the other. And if you have one more than the other, it's not perfect. It's not ideal. You have to have the two together. If you have a Talmud Chacham who talks Lashon Hara, then his Yirah Shamayim is less. If you have a Talmud Chacham, somebody maybe who hasn't got such good midos, hasn't got good character traits, then it's weak. It's not good. If you have a person who's very honest and very humane, but he doesn't have any Torah, it's also not good. Too much Yirah, not the two have to be matched together. You need the wisdom and the knowledge of the Torah together with the Yirah Shamayim, Reishis Chachma Yiras Hashem, and that is what Shlomo HaMelech is saying. Shema Eitza, listen to the Chachma and accept the authority of the Yirah Shamayim, and then you'll become very wise. And Atzas Hashem Hisokum, and then you'll have what's called the advice, the Siyata D'Shema, to do the right thing. You'll find your way out of the maze. You'll go through the maze and go through. If those are the two cases, I'd like to show you examples, what I believe are beautiful case studies where we see the Chochmah coming out, which I think is a beautiful point. Let me demonstrate to you in certain case studies, which I discovered myself, where you see the tremendous Chochmah of the Talmud Chacham coming out, meaning accept the Chochmah, Shema Eitza, listen to the Chochmah. I have a friend, a very close friend, who, his daughter, when she was a little child of 3 years old, Lo Aleinu, had Yenamacha, had a cancer, and she was very sick for quite a long time. And we all davened for the child with tremendous devotion and tremendous care, and eventually she recovered, and it was a wonderful, wonderful simcha, and the child recovered. Then, I think it was 17, 18 years later, he was looking for a shidduch for his daughter. And obviously, the question came up, should he reveal what his daughter had gone through when it came to shidduchim or not? And he was in a tremendous quandary. Shall I keep quiet, or shall we say something? She was a wonderful girl and a tremendous personality and a beautiful character she had. What do I do? Shall I say something? He was in a maze. He didn't know what to do. So he went to ask the Andauta. He went to the man in the tower, meaning a Talmud Chacham. He went to both Rav Eliashiv and the Stipler. He asked them, what do I do under these circumstances? And it's interesting, they both said exactly the same thing. And really, in reality, many of us have skeletons in the cupboard. When it comes to certain situations, when we come to different situations, we don't know. When it comes to shidduchim, do you reveal, do you speak out, or do you keep quiet? What do you do? What's the chokhmah to do? Should you mention about what you've gone through or not? And both of them said the same thing. Both Rabbi Alpren and the Stipler said, let them meet and go out at least 2 or 3 times. I think, as far as I remember, after the 3rd time, you must mention it. You mustn't let it go to further than that. Let them meet and see if they like each other. And then after the 3rd time, you must mention what had gone on and go ahead. And then you can move on. You can't hide it. There's such a thing. There are certain things which you don't have to say and certain things which you do have to say. And something like this, you have to speak up, but not straight away. Let them meet. Let the shidduch begin. And it worked. And the girl got married. I think she's now marrying after several of her grandchildren as well, which is a beautiful point as well. That's the point behind it. Meaning, one does have to reveal, and the Talmud Chacham said to him, you have to mention it, but only after 2 or 3 meetings, not straight away. Give the shidduch a chance. That was the Chachma which Rabbi Alpren and the Stipler had both said. A second point, which I thought was a beautiful point of recognizing the Chokhmah of Emunas Chachamim in the following way. I remember reading about the great Pikeach in America, one of the most wise and the most understanding people in America, who was called the Pikeach of America, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. And Rabbi Gifter called him the Pikeach Hador, the most intelligent, wisest person in the generation. That's what he was called. I remember reading that Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky had a tremendous amount to deal with Baalei Tshuva, people who were new into the movement of torah and mitzvahs. And he was very careful with them and he ensured that they must keep up something of their previous life. Meaning, if they're a pianist, stay as a pianist. If you had a business, you shouldn't change your life completely. And Rabbi Yaakov used to say always, one of the greatest problems of a Baal Tshuva is that they should remain mainstream. They should remain normal. They shouldn't become abnormal. And very often a person, when they come into torah and mitzvahs, they become extreme. They become in some ways a fanatic. And that's a tremendous shame. They lose their normalcy. And Rabbi Yaakov stressed all the time, how do you retain your balance? If you're in sport, keep up the sport. If you're in music, whatever it is, if you have a business, don't give up everything. Certainly, of course, when it comes to Shabbos and mitzvahs and dinim and choshen mishpah, of course you have to, but be careful to remain normal and try as much as you can to involve them with Torah, but that they should be mainstream. And that's the most beautiful point as well. Mainstream is the most beautiful point, if they're able to retain that. There is, I don't know if I've mentioned it previously, a beautiful story which Pinchas used to say about a family in Ofakim. It's a wonderful story, this. He said there was a family of Baalei Tshuva who came to live in the Torah community in Ofakim. And they came into the community and they were completely strange in every way. They learned how to keep Shabbos and they sent the children to the Orthodox schools and they eventually got into the system. And the children did extremely well. And the children got into the system and eventually, when the children grew up, Pinchas noticed that the children became almost some of the best children in the Cheder and the Beis Yaakov, and they completely mixed into the community. And the father stayed in his business, and he sat and learned in the Beis Hamedrash at night, and they became completely mixed into the community. And it was a wonder to see. And then after a few years, they came to the parasha of Shidduchim with this family, and each one of them married off a most beautiful, wonderful family. And Pinchas, I remember, I said, I couldn't believe such a family. I remember how they came into the community, and I see all the children are married, and the most wonderful shidduchim and wonderful families are raised. And I went round to the house one evening, Pinchas said, I sat and said, I'd like to come in and talk to you. I sat in the living room with the husband and the wife, and I sat and I said, I'd like you to tell me, I'd really like to know. I remember when you came into the community, and you really had no background and nothing at all. And I look at your family, and yours completely joined in, and you're natural in the community, which is very, very strange, really, for Baal Tshuva to come in and to completely mix in a mangle and feel so much at home. What is the reason behind it? And they both turned around and said, Hashem has helped us a great deal. And Pinchas said, I didn't accept that. I said, I'm not moving from here until you turn around and tell me exactly what was your chokhmah, what did you do in order to remain in the fold so beautifully. And they didn't say anything at all. Eventually, Pinchas turned around and said, I'm not leaving this house until you tell me, what did you do? I need to know. What did you do that you succeeded so much with your family? And he looked at the wife, and she was crying at the table. And Pinchas said, why are you crying? And the lady turned around and said as follows, from the minute we came into this community, I asked Hashem in my prayers continually, I want my children to remain normal and mainstream and not to become extreme. I want them to become accepted. Thank you so much for telling me. That was a prayer of the mother of the family. She begged and asked the Almighty in her prayers, let my children be normal and mainstream and not become extreme or fanatic. I want them to feel normal in the situation. And Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky was very particular on that, and that was a beautiful point. I remember I once discussed with the great Rabbi Uri Zohar. He was my neighbor in Sorotskin, and I used to talk to him at different times. I once turned around and said, Rabbi Uri, tell me, what is the best possible way that you can bring a person into Torah mitzvahs? He said, one way, open up a Gemara and start learning Gemara. Once they realize the brilliance and the ingenuity and the tremendous chokhmah and the revelation and the spiritual growth and enlightenment in Torah, then they suddenly become attracted. And Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky evidently had said the same thing as well. Let them recognize the beauty of Torah and the wisdom and the chokhmah and the enlightenment and the refinement and the etiquette and the different ways, that the most beautiful, the richness, Ashreinu Matov Chokeh. If they can recognize that, then they're already on the way. Recognize the beauty. And Rabbi Uri told me, if they learn a piece of Gemara, especially with the men, you'll be able to find they'll be attracted into Torah, the beauty and the wisdom of Chokhmah, which is the Am Segula Mikol Ha'ami, which we're so fortunate to have. That's the second point. The third point, which I brought to bring you, which I found was a fascinating story, which I love telling this story. It's about a certain Rosh Yeshiva here in Eretz Yisrael who looked after Balei Tshuva. His name is Rabbi Elbaz. He has a yeshiva in Meir Shoim called Machane Yisrael. It's a famous yeshiva for Balei Tshuva in his community. He told the following Maisa. It's a remarkable Maisa. He said he had a chassan who was getting married in the afternoon. And he told the chassan to come to his office early in the morning, and they want to discuss certain things with him before he gets married. Eventually the chassan turned up very, very late, and it was the afternoon. The chassan, I think he said, was at 6 o'clock in the evening or something like that. The chassan came to his office at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and turned around and said to Rabbi Elbaz or Shiva, I'm sorry, I'm dropping out. I cannot go ahead with this wedding. I cannot marry this girl. This girl is much too good for me. I don't deserve such a girl. I'm not going ahead. Rabbi Elbaz said, it's the day of your wedding. You can't possibly move away from it. You can't possibly not go. And he was distraught. He was in a tremendous maze, Rabbi Elbaz, the Rosh Yeshiva. What am I going to do? I know that the Kala is waiting there in the hall, waiting for a chassan to turn up, and the chassan is running off, and he said, I'm not marrying it. I'm not going ahead. And what can you do? And he was in a very deep maze, heavy in the maze. I didn't know what to do. He decided to himself, what can I do? I'm going to go down to Bnei Brak, and I'm going to ask the stipler what shall I do. Before he went to Bnei Brak, he went down to the wedding hall, and true enough, the Kala was there waiting. She was a Russian girl, a Baal Tshuva, which was waiting for a chassan to turn up. The chassan wasn't going to turn up. He turned around and said to the Kala's family and the Kala, there'll be a slight delay, not to worry, I'll be back soon. Please wait a bit, there might be a delay of an hour or so until we get going. He then went down to Bnei Brak and went and asked the stipler. He said, what did I do, Rebbe? What shall I possibly do? The chassan is running off and he's refused to go, and the Kala is waiting. Believe it or not, the stipler turned round and said to Rabbi Elbaz, is there another bocher in yeshiva who could possibly marry this girl, who might be suitable? He said, but Rebbe, how can you say such a thing? How can you say another bocher will come forward that she's expecting to marry Reuven? You wanted to marry Shimon or somebody else entirely? How can you do that? Incredible story. Stipler said, find somebody else in yeshiva. So Rabbi Elbaz says, how can I do such a thing? The stipler turned around and said to Rabbi Elbaz, if you don't think I'm right, go to Yerushalayim and ask my mechut, go and ask Rabbi Eliashib what he thinks. He went back to Yerushalayim, went into Rabbi Eliashib and asked, what shall I do on this? Rabbi Eliashib said exactly the same thing as with the stipler. Is there another boch in yeshiva who can possibly marry her? He then said the same thing as the stipler had said. He gave the same bocha. Rabbi Eliashib said as well, and if this other bocha will take this girl in marriage, I promise him he'll have the most successful and happy and wonderful marriage and a beautiful family after, if this bocha should marry her. So he decided himself, he thought there was another bocha. He took another bocha, believe it or not, and he turned up with another bocha, and he told the girl, this is who you're marrying, and she married him, and they had a wonderful family after. Incredible story. Unbelievable. On the day, I would prefer, if any single girls are listening to this year, please promise you will not have any nightmares from this mice which I just told. I hope not. It's a frightening mice, but they married and they had a wonderful marriage afterwards. We used to have a funny line in my family when my boys were going out in shidduchim. So I used to tell them, when you go to bed at night, please leave your tie on the table next to you. You never know what's going to happen in the middle of the night. Once I told them that mice, you never know what's going to happen. But they married and it was a wonderful marriage. But there we were inside the maze. No, we were deep inside the maze and we didn't know what to do. And then Rabbi Elbaz turned around and said as follows, this is what happened here. I asked the Talmid Chachamim of the Dor, and they both suggested this is what the tikkun should be, this is what should be done. Incredible. There you see the tremendous chokhmah of the Talmid Chacham in the Andarta, in the tower above the maze, when you don't know what to do in a situation. I'd like to make one point in this shir, which I think is very important and very crucial when it comes to Emunas Chachamim, and that is the following point. When it comes to Emunas Chachamim, you have to be very careful. You cannot possibly compare one situation to another situation. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky insisted that any of his answers which he gave to people should never ever be published, he said, because you can never compare situations. This person in this life, with this personality, with this background, with this facilities, with this strengths, with this... You can't compare Psak Halacha, one opinion about Emunas Chachamim to another. You can't make those comparisons. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky insisted you can't do that. Every person is an exclusive story. Each person is unique with different conditions and different terms. And he insisted never ever to compare. He told the following episode, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, to prove this point. He said as follows, especially when it comes to Yirah Shamayim, in the following way. Rabbi Yaakov said that he once had a Talmid in his shir in Monsey who was an accountant, who was training to become an accountant. And his boss in the firm when he was working insisted that when he goes out to meet other clients, he has to take his kapul off. He's not allowed to wear his kapul. In the office, he said, I don't mind if you wear your kapul, but when you go out to certain clients, I insist that you take your kapul off. He went and asked Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, shall I go ahead with this or not? Shall I take this job or not? And Rabbi Yaakov said to him, I think you could. It's only for 2 years, it's a short time, and I know who you are, I know your abilities, I know you'll be so disturbed by having your kapul off, you'll be extremely careful with yourself, even though you're not wearing a kapul. You can do such a thing. And he allowed the bacher not to wear his kapul. He was training to be an accountant. Another student inside the shir of Rabbi Yaakov heard about this, and he also took his kapul off. And they came and told Rabbi Yaakov, and Rabbi Yaakov said as follows, I never gave that other bacher. I only gave permission to the first bacher. I would never have given the second bacher permission to take off his kapul. Each person is different. He's not made the same way. His tsar and his difficulty of not wearing a kapul is not the same as the first bacher. And from there we learn a very important point. That is, you can never compare, you can never cross-reference from one situation to another, whether it's a shidduch, whether it's a parnasa, whether a person, what they go into life, what type of... All the circumstances are always unique and always exclusive. And that's a very important point in Emunas Chachamim. You can never make comparisons between them. The second point which I'd like to say is something which I've discovered from reading a great deal and listening to many, many people. One of the most important points when it comes to Emunas Chachamim is almost the abhorrence of Talmid Chachamim for machlokes and embarrassing somebody else. And that seems to be a cardinal rule. This you can take across the board. The importance of never hurting somebody else, of avoiding machlokes. And you see this coming out in many, many different situations of Talmid Chachamim, where they were so careful to avoid machlokes, to stand back, as in the words of Steinman used to say, Hamenutzach hu hamanatzeach. Someone who is beaten down, someone who gives in, is not on the lower hand, he's on the upper hand. Hamanatzeach. Hamenutzach hi hamanatzeach. Someone who stands back and gives up in a machlokes and doesn't force a machlokes, he is the person who wins in the end. And the beautiful stories which I'd like to share with you, I think that goes across the board when it comes to Emunas Chachamim, listening to the advice of a Talmid Chacham and avoiding and standing back from machlokes. I remember reading about the great Rosh Yeshiva in Mechavia, Rav Gusman, Rabbi Yisrael Zev Gusman. He was a great Talmid Chacham. He was in the Beis Din of Reb Chaim Ozer Grinsky at the age of 17. He was a phenomenal Talmid Chacham. And I remember hearing about him that one Friday night when he davened in yeshiva, a certain bacher went forward in daven Kabbalah Shabbos in the yeshiva. It then came to the time of 20-25 minutes. They waited after Kabbalah Shabbos until they davened Ma'ariv. Certain people of the yeshiva then came up to Rav Gusman and asked him as follows. They said, Rebbe, we would prefer that this person who davened Kabbalah Shabbos does not daven Ma'ariv afterwards. The reason is, it is now in the times of Sfiras HaOmer, and he shaves. He doesn't keep the minhag of growing his beard. He shaves during the Sfiras HaOmer. Can we ask him not to daven for the Omid? And Rav Gusman turned around and said as follows, in the most phenomenal way of wisdom and understanding. Here you see the Chochmah and the Yirah coming together. Said Rav Gusman as follows, 1 minute. Not shaving during the Omer is a custom in Klal Yisrael. If you're going to embarrass this bocha and not allow him to daven, that's a doraisa, that's a din from the Torah. You're not allowed to embarrass somebody else. He'll be so embarrassed. You're not allowed to do that. Since when does a custom overweigh and overcast the din of embarrassing? Embarrassing somebody is an awful situation. And that was the lesson which we saw from how important it is to avoid machlokes. Rav Guzman said, under no circumstances, he must daven ma'ariv. He should not feel bad. Maybe you can speak to him another time about shaving during the Sfiras Omer, but do not under any circumstances embarrass him. A beautiful story is told about Rav Steinman. I remember reading that he used to go around and test little children inside Cheder and ask them when they were just, I think, in Kitta Aleph or Kitta Beis, who are the 10 generations from Adam until Noach? And he asked the children, repeat for me the 10 generations. And then he said the 10 generations from Noach until Avram. Who are the 10 generations? Who goes from Noach until Avram? Who are the 10 generations? And he asked the children. And then Rosh Shlomo turned around and said as follows, but who are the descendants who came from Noach? Noach had Adam had 3 children, Cain and Hevel and Shes. There were 3 children who came from Adam. Cain and Hevel and Shes. From who does Noach come from? Do we come from Cain and Hevel or Shes? And all the children turned around and said, no, we come from Shes. And Rav Steinman turned around and asked the children, 1 minute, but 1 second, what happened to the families of Cain and Hevel? Why don't we go according to that lineage? And the children answered, no, Cain was all killed in the flood and Hevel was killed. We only have Shes. And Steinman asked the children, why is that the case? Because there was a machlokes between Cain and Hevel. Meaning when you have a machlokes, said Rav Steinman to the kinderlach, you don't have any importance to you. You lose all your significance. And after 120 years, he told the children, you go up to heaven and they ask you, on what was your machlokes? It was Hevel Havolim, it was nothing. You'll answer for that in Shamayim. Steinman would tell the children, little children in Cheder, be very careful not to have any machlokes. How careful one has to be. When you see by Talmid Chacham how careful they were to avoid any machlokes. I remember reading a different story, beautiful story about Rav Steinman, who a young married man came to ask Rav Steinman. He was married for 10 years and he didn't have any children. And he felt terrible not having children. He came and asked Rav Steinman, what should he do in this situation? He thinks maybe the reason why he doesn't have children, he thought, is because when he was a child in Cheder, he used to tease mercilessly a certain child inside the Cheder who was mentally not balanced so well, but he was the ringleader of teasing him and tormenting him. And he felt terrible. How can he possibly now ask forgiveness for this person who he teased? And he thinks that was the reason why he doesn't have any children. He then said that this person now is a mental facility and he's had a complete breakdown. It's not relevant for me to go and ask him, what shall I do? How can I ask forgiveness to this person? Rav Steinman said, go and ask Rav Eliashiv in Yerushalayim what to do. He went to Rav Eliashiv, and Rav Eliashiv said, if he would have died, then you could go to his kever and take 10 people and ask forgiveness. But it's not the case here. And that these circumstances, the best you can possibly do, is to help the person as much as he can and hope one day he recovers and you can ask him for forgiveness. See how far it goes, how awful the situation is. One has to be so careful. You see, Emunas Chachamim goes across the board. Be very careful, not embarrassing under any circumstances. I'd like to add my own points here when it comes to Emunas Chachamim, and I think one point which is crucial of being careful, and that is the mitzvah of Kibbut Avoreim is a mitzvah. It's one of the great 10, one of number 5 in the great 10. Kabed Asavicha ve'esimecha. Meaning, when you see the words Kabed Asavicha, you have to be super careful. Parents are aristocracy and nobility, and we are lower class. Parents are upper class. One has to be so careful in issues of parents and when Ben Adam Lachaveo as well. I'd like to suggest the following point. Why is it that we see Talmid Chacham are so careful to avoid any machlokes and embarrassing anybody under any circumstance? Why are we so careful about this? I think the reason is because that is the reason why we don't have a Beis Hamikdash in our times, because of sinas chinam. When you have machlokes, then you often have a mindless hatred between people, and that is the reason why we're sitting in Golas, sinas chinam, churban Beis Hamikdash, because of the mice of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, and maybe that is the reason why, how careful we have to be. And you see all Talmid Chacham are so careful because of that, because that is the source of our evil. The source of our problems is sinas chinam. Second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because there was no ahavas habrios, there was only sinas chinam between people, and that's probably the reason why. And therefore, if we can perhaps recap, I'd like to give you certain rules which I think are very important when it comes to Emunas Chacham. Certain ideas which I think are very functional and crucial when it comes to it. The first, as we mentioned, when it comes to Emunas Chachamim, you can never possibly compare. You have to keep each situation separate by itself. You can't compare one situation to another because you never know the circumstances, the terms and conditions. As Rabbi Alpren said, he never have any of his answers published because you can't compare. Each one is personal and very unique and exclusive to the circumstances of the person who's asking them. The second is, I'd like to suggest, Lanias Daiti, when you come to ask a Talmid Chacham, before you go in and ask, you should spend a few minutes davening and asking for Siyata Dishmaya. There is a posuk in Mishnah, La'odom Ma'achei Leiv, U'me'Hashem Ma'aneh Loshen. To a man has to place his heart in front of the Almighty. U'me'Hashem Ma'aneh Loshen, and Hashem will answer him. You're going to a Talmid Chacham to ask advice. If you're going to ask advice, you're putting in front of someone who represents the Almighty in this world. He is the Tzelem Elokim. He has Chochmah and his Yirah Shamayim together. You're asking, and therefore I'm suggesting you should daven and ask the Almighty to prepare your heart, meaning by prayer, and give some money to tzedakah before you go in and ask the Talmid Chacham. And on those circumstances, you will receive Siyata D'Shmaya Mitzvah Hashem. There's a way to ask. The way to ask is to daven and to give tzedakah, and then go and ask the Talmid Chacham. I think that's the best way. The third rule, which I'd like to suggest in Emunas Chacham, is as follows. You don't go fishing around for a heter. When it comes to Talmid Chachamim, you don't say, who will be the one who will give me what I want to do? You go to ask advice. When you go and ask a Rav, it doesn't have to be the same Rav all the time. You can choose. I remember going to one person maybe for Chinuch Bonim, another person when it comes to financial matters, maybe another one when it comes to issues of marriage. There are certain, you ask different Talmid, but if you are going to ask, you must be prepared to accept and not just look and fish for a heter. I remember my wife and I had a certain issue with a neighbor where we once lived somewhere, and it was a difficult situation. I went and asked the Talmid Chacham what to do under these circumstances, and the Talmid Chacham asked the question. I was in a maze, and I asked the Talmid Chacham, and he answered a certain way, which was against what the neighbor was saying. And the neighbor turned around and she said to me, but didn't you know how to ask? You have to ask for a heter. You don't ask for an issa. You ask how you could do something, not why you can't do something. I thought that's exactly what we're not supposed to do. When it comes to asking a shayla, you must accept what the Rav is saying. You must accept them. In other words, you're going there to listen rather than to get Shema Eitz of a Kabeh Musa. Listen, Shema is a loshon to accept something. The final point which I like to suggest, which I think many people often suffer from this and don't ask a question, what should not be embarrassed to ask, especially maybe single girls who come and ask a question, they don't have connection with the Rosh Hashiva, they don't have a connection, so you must call up and ask the Rebbetzin or ask somebody how you can make a contact. Do not be embarrassed to ask a question when you're asking a Talmid Chacham. One has to push, and lo habaishin lo made. A person who is shy will never get anywhere. You have to force your way. I'm not saying with pressure, but don't give up. Give up. Keep on trying your way and finding somebody who can ask. I remember I had a situation myself which was very similar to that. I was trying to help a certain Bachur in yeshiva, and he needed a certain shidduch, and I was talking to him quite often, and I didn't know his background, and he told me that he learnt in Torah Das. So I decided to myself, how can I possibly find out about him if I don't ask the Rosh Hashiva? I plucked up the courage, and I called up Rav Pam in New York, and the Rebbetzin answered the phone. I said, I would like to speak to the Rosh Hashiva. Rav Pam get on the phone. I can only tell you, talking to Rav Pam, if I can say such a thing, was like talking to Uncle Charlie. He was incredibly warm, unbelievably helpful, and very, very full of upbeat and very optimistic. And he helped me in a tremendous way. Meaning, I was in a maze, and I went and asked in the tower, and I was fortunate to receive the answer that I have. Don't give up. Keep on trying as best as you can. If maybe this Talmid Chacham won't, how do you choose? Try and choose somebody who has Chochmah and Yirah. Those are the eyes of the dove. Shema Eitza B'Kabel Musa. The Bantech Kan B'Acher Visecha. The last thing which I like to suggest is something which I think is the overall impression which you're supposed to have when it comes to asking an Eitzah per Talmid Chacham. I'd like to quote the Psukim from Shir Hashem, right at the beginning of Shir Hashem. The Pasuk says in Perek Aleph, Hagidoli she'ava nafshi, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Klal Yisrael, tell me, you of the woman who I love. Eichot tira, eichot harbitz vatzohorayim, says they, Baye Oilam to Klal Yisrael. Where are you going to graze? Where are you going to find panos from? Eichot tarbitz. Where will you find somewhere to Batzohoraim in the heat of the day, in the heat of exile? Where are you? Eichot tarbitz. Where are you going to find somewhere to find your panosa? Where are you going to live in the time of difficulty? How are you going to find in the heat of exile? Im lo seidi lach hayofa banoshim. I will let you know, you most beautiful of women. Go out in the footsteps of the flock. And take the little children to the tents of the shepherds. Meaning as follows. When you go to search to ask, go in the footsteps of the Torah, meaning look to see from previous generations. When we go to ask a Talmid Chacham, we're looking to find out what is the Masorah, what is the tradition in this situation. I'm in the maze, I'm in a challenge, I don't know what to do. You're going to search the ways of the ancestors. When you go and ask a Talmid Chacham, what is the ways of the Torah? The tents of the shepherds. I'm going to find out what is the way, what does Hashem want from me in this way? And that's the nature of it. You're going to search out. And therefore, it's so important to ask a Talmid Chacham who has Chachma and Yiras Shamayim. You're asking what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants to me in this situation. These are the situations. Go out in the footsteps of the flock, meaning look to see in past generations. And that's what we're doing when we go to ask a Talmid Chacham. What is the way of the tradition? What is the way of the Masorah? How does the Torah look at these problems when I'm inside the maze? You're asking the man in the tower, he's looking down and he's answering you. The tents of the shepherds, meaning what does the Torah HaKadosh say from this? That is, you're going to search. And you to daven for that. I'm suggesting one ask, one prays, one says a few chapters of Tehillim and give tzedakah. Mitzvah Hashem, you should have tremendous siyata d'shmaya in your questions and grow in Emunas Chachamim. And that certainly is the way of the growth of Klal Yisrael. We should only have success and hear wonderful Besilas Tovos Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael. I'd like to make a final point. In Mitzvah Hashem, I hope with my wife to be in Lakewood, New Jersey from April the 21st until May the 12th. If you would be interested in my coming into your community, maybe to say a shir during Pesach or after Pesach, I would be delighted. Please be in touch with me. My email address is yalpren, YALPREN yalprenrbs@gmail.com. Please be in touch with me. I would like to come and maybe share divrei chizuk in your community. Bracha v'hatzlacha v'kol tov.